What if the reason you feel saved, but not free, is because your spirit is awake, but your flesh is still in control? You pray, you believe, you want to grow, yet something keeps pulling you back. This is not weakness, this is war, and today, you will finally understand why. This message is not for everyone. It was never meant to be. It is for the chosen one who has reached a quiet breaking point. The one who believes, who prays, who knows God is real, yet still feels an inner resistance that refuses to disappear. You sense it every day, a tension you cannot explain, as if something inside you is awake, but restrained, pulled in two directions at the same time. One voice whispers comfort, ease, distraction, and control. The other calls you higher, demands discipline, truth, surrender, and freedom. And that inner friction is not confusion. It is evidence of calling, because only the chosen feel this war so intensely. Here is the truth most people will never hear, and many will refuse to accept. You cannot feed the flesh and free the spirit at the same time. You cannot entertain both sides and expect peace. That is why you feel saved, yet not fully free. Aware, yet restrained. Alive, yet not unleashed. This video is not about becoming more religious. It is not about appearances, routines, or spiritual performance. It is about something deeper, sharper, and far more dangerous to the old version of you. Today you will be shown 5 powerful habits that systematically weaken the flesh and finally release your spirit into clarity, authority, and inner freedom. If you feel this message pulling at you, that is not coincidence. That is recognition. Before we go any further, pause for a moment. Like this video, so this message reaches other chosen ones still trapped in silence. Subscribe if you have not yet, because this space is not built for shallow faith, but real transformation. And comment 99 below. Not as a number, but as a signal. Spiritually, 99 represents leaving comfort to pursue completion, refusing to remain almost free, and choosing fullness over familiarity. By commenting it, you are declaring that you are done feeding what weakens you and ready to awaken what was chosen in you. Now stay with me, because what comes next will not entertain your flesh. It will confront it. There is a reason this habit is always avoided, delayed, or explained away, and it has nothing to do with discipline and everything to do with control. The flesh does not fear prayer as much as it fears loss of dominance. It survives by being constantly answered, constantly soothed, constantly fed. It is trained to react the moment discomfort appears, reaching for noise, pleasure, distraction, sugar, stimulation, validation, or escape. That is how it stays loud. That is how it stays seated on the throne. Fasting, real fasting, is dangerous because it interrupts that automatic cycle. It introduces silence where impulse used to speak. It creates space where craving expected obedience. And in that space, something unsettling happens. The flesh realizes it is no longer in charge. This is why fasting feels uncomfortable before it ever feels powerful. Not because you are weak, but because the hierarchy is being challenged. Intentional denial is not about food alone. Food is only the most obvious entry point. The deeper act is refusing to immediately answer the flesh when it demands relief. When hunger rises and you do not rush to silence it. When boredom appears and you do not anesthetize it with screens. When desire knocks and you do not instantly comply, a new awareness surfaces. You begin to notice how often your actions were not chosen, but triggered. That realization alone is a fracture in the flesh's authority. Fasting is not the absence of nourishment. It is the redirection of attention. While the flesh weakens, the spirit sharpens. Sensitivity returns. Discernment heightens. What once felt normal suddenly feels heavy. What once controlled you begins to lose urgency. You hear differently. You think differently. You respond instead of react. This is alignment. Not self-punishment, not spiritual theatrics, but internal order being restored. The spirit does not shout to be heard. It waits for space. And fasting creates that space with surgical precision. You start to feel an unfamiliar clarity, not emotional, but grounded. Not euphoric, but steady. The cravings that once felt irresistible begin to feel negotiable. The impulses that once felt urgent lose their intimidation. That is the moment many people quit, because the flesh will protest loudly when it realizes its grip is slipping. It will whisper excuses, rationalizations, spiritual justifications, anything to regain control. But if you stay, if you do not rush to comfort, something shifts permanently. You realize you are not your appetite. You are not your urges. You are not your impulses. You are the one deciding. Freedom begins there, not when desire disappears, but when desire no longer commands. Excess ends, clarity begins, and authority returns quietly. This is why fasting has always preceded awakening. It is not dramatic on the outside, but it is seismic within. And here is the unsettling truth most never reach. Once you experience the flesh losing power, you can never unsee how much of your life it controlled. And that realization sets the stage for the next habit. Because once the flesh is weakened, something else is finally able to rise. And what rises next changes everything. There is a silent reason confusion keeps returning, even after moments of clarity, and it has nothing to do with intelligence, faith level, or effort. It has everything to do with what has been feeding your inner world when no one is watching. The spirit does not collapse suddenly. It starves gradually. And starvation is deceptive because it feels normal until weakness appears. You are not losing spiritual ground because you lack strength. You are losing it because truth has not been occupying enough space to govern your thoughts. The flesh thrives in noise, stimulation, endless input, and fragmented attention. It is comfortable in chaos. The spirit, however, does not compete with noise. It responds to truth. And truth must be consumed intentionally, not accidentally. The word is not information meant to be skimmed. It is alignment meant to be absorbed. Every day you wake up, something is shaping your inner authority. Conversations, media, memories, fears, expectations, pressure. None of these are neutral. They either reinforce clarity or quietly distort it. When the word is absent, confusion does not announce itself. It slowly settles in as indecision, emotional instability, spiritual dullness, and compromised boundaries. You start doubting what you once knew. You hesitate where you once stood firm. Temptation sounds reasonable instead of foreign. That is not moral failure. That is malnourishment. Truth does not merely inform the spirit, it calibrates it. When you expose your mind daily to divine truth, discernment sharpens without effort. You begin to sense what is off before it manifests. You recognize subtle compromise before it becomes collapse. The word cuts cleanly, not emotionally. It separates truth from distortion, conviction from condemnation, purpose from pressure. This is why it is described as living. Living things respond, they adjust, they confront. The word challenges your assumptions, interrupts your comfort, and reorders your internal priorities. That discomfort is not resistance, it is correction. Authority is restored quietly when truth becomes familiar. Temptation loses volume, not because desire disappears, but because truth has become louder. You stop negotiating with thoughts that once dominated you. You stop entertaining internal arguments that once exhausted you. The spirit begins to lead without force. This is why daily exposure matters. Not long sessions fueled by guilt, but consistent contact fueled by hunger. The flesh wants novelty. The spirit wants depth. When truth becomes your daily intake, your reactions change, your emotional responses stabilize, your decisions become cleaner, and here is the part few expect. When the word fills you consistently, you stop seeking external confirmation for internal direction. You no longer need constant validation, signs, or reassurance. Authority settles in. You move with quiet certainty. Confusion retreats. Fear loses leverage. Not because life becomes easier, but because truth becomes dominant. And once truth takes residence, something shifts in how you hear everything else. Voices that once sounded convincing suddenly feel hollow. Distractions that once pulled you now feel expensive. And this creates a dangerous moment for the flesh because a spirit anchored in truth is no longer easily deceived. That realization alone prepares you for what comes next. Because when truth governs your inner world, the next habit stops being optional and becomes unavoidable. There is a reason prayer feels inconvenient exactly when you need it most, and it is not because you are busy, distracted, or tired. It is because prayer threatens the last illusion the flesh clings to, control. The flesh does not mind spirituality as long as it remains passive, contained, predictable. It tolerates belief, routines, even words spoken without depth. But the moment prayer becomes real, honest, and sustained, something inside resists. Thoughts scatter, discomfort rises, urgency appears elsewhere. That resistance is not weakness, it is exposure. Real prayer strips the flesh of its authority because prayer transfers governance. When you pray deeply, you are no longer managing outcomes, protecting ego, or negotiating image. You are surrendering command. and the flesh despises that exchange. Polite prayers do not disturb anything. They coexist with compromise. But raw prayer confronts. It names what has been hidden. It pulls unresolved fear into the light. It drags unspoken motives to the surface. This is why real prayer feels heavy before it feels freeing. You are not performing. You are presenting yourself without armor. Persistent prayer reshapes your internal posture. At first, nothing seems to change externally, and this is where many stop. They mistake silence for absence. But silence is often the sound of restructuring. While you remain, something unseen is happening. The spirit is strengthening its position. The flesh is losing leverage. You begin to notice subtle shifts. Your reactions slow. Your emotional spikes shorten. Your impulses hesitate before speaking. This is not self-control. This is spiritual authority reclaiming space. Prayer trains the spirit to lead instead of respond. You stop living at the mercy of your inner noise. Instead of being driven by urgency, you are guided by clarity. And here is what surprises most people. The more consistently you pray, the less dramatic it needs to be. Prayer stops being an event and becomes an environment. You carry stillness with you. Pressure loses its grip. Anxiety no longer dictates your pace. This is why prayer is the main strategy of the awakened. Not because it changes God, but because it changes who is governing you. Every honest conversation with God weakens the flesh's narrative. Every moment of presence dismantles false urgency. Every surrendered word restores order. The flesh wants you rushed, reactive, defensive. Prayer makes you grounded, intentional, unshakable. And eventually, something unmistakable happens. You begin to recognize when the flesh is trying to speak over truth. You sense the manipulation before it forms. You feel the interruption rising, and instead of obeying it, you return to stillness. That is when prayer stops being something you do and becomes something you are rooted in. The flesh loses its voice not through force, but through irrelevance. And once the flesh is no longer the loudest voice in the room, a deeper confrontation approaches, one that exposes what has been quietly preserved, because the next habit does not weaken the flesh gently, it dismantles it at the root. There is a reason certain patterns survive prayer, fasting, and even moments of clarity, and it is not because God is distant or power is lacking. It is because what remains hidden continues to negotiate from the shadows. The flesh does not need to be loud to be strong. It only needs secrecy. What is concealed gains leverage over time. It adapts. It rationalizes. It disguises itself as personality, coping, stress, or history. And slowly, it builds chains that feel familiar enough to ignore. Repentance is the one habit the flesh cannot manipulate, because repentance removes its hiding place. This is why it is avoided, softened, or delayed. Not because it is painful, but because it is honest. And honesty collapses false control. Repentance is not humiliation. It is exposure without self-defense. It is the moment you stop explaining yourself and start confronting what has been quietly shaping you. Pride hates this moment. The flesh resists it fiercely. It prefers justification over transformation. It would rather say, "This is just who I am," than admit, "This no longer belongs here." But chosen ones are not called to protect what limits them. They are called to dismantle it. Daily repentance sharpens spiritual sensitivity in a way nothing else can. It clears residue that dulls discernment. It restores responsiveness. You begin to feel conviction again, not as condemnation, but as guidance. You notice subtle shifts in thought, motive, and reaction. Things that once passed unnoticed now feel misaligned. That is not restriction. That is freedom returning. Repentance breaks cycles because it interrupts agreement. The flesh survives on unchallenged permission. Once confronted consistently, its patterns weaken. It loses predictability. It loses rhythm. It loses authority. This is why repentance must be daily, not dramatic. Not a single moment at an altar, but a posture of awareness. A willingness to say, "Search me," without conditions. When repentance becomes habitual, clarity sharpens. You stop confusing desire with direction. You stop mistaking impulse for intuition. Your internal compass recalibrates. And here is the revelation few expect. Repentance does not make you smaller, it makes you lighter. Shame isolates. Repentance restores connection. Shame hides. Repentance exposes to heal. The spirit regains strength not because sin disappears instantly, but because honesty replaces denial. And honesty is lethal to the flesh. The chains that once felt permanent begin to loosen quietly. You realize you are no longer defending what once controlled you. That realization is dangerous for the old self, because once exposure becomes normal, nothing hidden can survive long. And this prepares you for the final habit, the one that determines whether freedom becomes sustained or slowly fades back into noise. Because what happens next decides how clearly you will continue to hear. There is a reason modern life feels endlessly loud, rushed, and crowded, and it is not accidental. Noise is not just sound. It is mental clutter, emotional overload, constant input, endless opinions, and perpetual stimulation. The flesh thrives there. It feels safe when everything is moving fast, when nothing is examined too closely, when silence feels uncomfortable. Noise keeps you reactive. It keeps you busy managing urgency instead of discerning direction. Solitude, however, exposes what noise conceals. When you step away from constant input, distractions lose their camouflage. You begin to notice what has been influencing you quietly. Thoughts you assumed were yours, emotions you thought were normal, pressures you accepted without question. Silence does not create these things. It reveals them. This is why silence feels unfamiliar before it feels sacred. The spirit does not force attention. It waits for availability. In solitude, perception sharpens. You begin to hear the difference between impulse and instruction, between fear and intuition, between urgency and calling. Direction increases not because life becomes simpler, but because inner noise diminishes. And then comes the part most people misunderstand. Solitude without accountability can still become isolation. Isolation is where the flesh regains power. It whispers unchecked. It distorts perspective. It convinces you that no one would understand, that you should carry everything alone. Accountability dismantles that lie. Spiritual accountability is not surveillance. It is protection. It is allowing trusted voices to see what you are tempted to hide. The flesh depends on secrecy to survive. Once exposed consistently, it weakens rapidly. Accountability interrupts self-deception. It keeps clarity from becoming arrogance. It grounds revelation in humility. When someone can ask you hard questions, pray with you honestly, and reflect truth without fear, secrecy collapses. You were never designed to win internal wars alone. Connection reinforces what solitude reveals. Silence helps you hear God. Accountability helps you stay aligned with what you heard. Together they create stability. Noise decreases, direction increases, secrecy ends, freedom begins. And here is the unexpected shift. When silence, solitude, and accountability become habits, peace stops feeling fragile. You no longer fear stillness. You no longer depend on constant stimulation. You move with quiet confidence. The flesh fades not through effort, but through lack of access. And once the flesh no longer has a hiding place, something settles inside you permanently. A grounded strength, a steady clarity, a sense that you are no longer drifting. That realization brings everything full circle, because once these 5 habits are established, a final truth must be faced, one that determines whether this awakening becomes a moment or a lasting transformation. You cannot step into resurrection power while protecting what was meant to die. You cannot carry new authority while clinging to old control. The moment you felt tension, resistance, discomfort throughout this message was not coincidence. It was exposure. God did not pull you out of darkness just to leave you distracted, numb, and spiritually anesthetized. He did not awaken your spirit so you could survive on shallow peace and familiar cycles. You were not freed to drift. You were freed to rise. And here is the final revelation that shifts everything. Freedom is not something you wait to feel. It is something you choose to walk in. Clarity is not unlocked by emotion. It is unlocked by alignment. Fire is not lost. It is starved. And anything that is fed consistently will eventually burn again. This awakening does not begin with intensity. It begins with habits, quiet decisions, unseen discipline, daily surrender. The flesh weakens when it is no longer entertained. The spirit strengthens when it is finally prioritized. And when the flesh loses control, the chosen one does not struggle upward. They rise naturally, with authority, with clarity, with an unshakable inner posture. This is the moment you stop negotiating with what has limited you. The moment you stop delaying what you already recognize. The moment you move from almost free to fully aligned. Do not let this be another message you felt and forgot. Anchor it. Seal it. Declare it. Comment below the one habit the Spirit is calling you to activate now, not tomorrow, not later, now. Your obedience may unlock someone else's breakthrough. And before you leave, type this phrase in the comments, exactly as it is. I choose alignment over appetite. Let it be your declaration, your line in the sand, your activation. Stay aligned, stay disciplined, walk forward without hesitation. You were not chosen to survive this season. You were chosen to lead through it.